Panasonic, the heart of your system.
Hi guys, it's Silas for Kit Guru, and today we are taking a look at the Raijintek ORCUS 240 AIO liquid cooler. So let's start with the basics. From the outset, the ORCUS 240 is, as its name suggests, a cooler with a 240mm radiator. You do get everything required for operation: the block, the tubing, the radiator, and some fans, but this is kind of where the similarities end. Raijintek have always done things a little differently, and the ORCUS 240 is no exception. The CPU block features a small little porthole window through which you can see a liquid flow indicator. Certainly a useful inclusion to ensure everything is running smoothly, and the pump, rather than being installed in either the block or the radiator, is in line, running midway down the tubing. The ORCUS 240 does also come complete with some RGB fans, although there is a core version without if you're looking to install your own fans. Priced at £89.99, you do seem to get quite a bit of bang for your buck. But it'll be interesting to see if these are unique features that actually aid performance or functionality, or if there's a reason Raijintek is the only manufacturer implementing them. Taking a quick look at the packaging, the ORCUS 240 is shown in full, although with a slightly smaller image which doesn't really advertise the RGB lighting, and in the box we find a number of surprises. The first thing that grabbed my attention was the included bottle of coolant. It's a small bottle at 100ml consisting of water and proline glycerol? Propylene glycerol? It's a small bottle at 100ml consisting of water and essentially similar to antifreeze mixed to prevent corrosion with aluminium components, like the radiator for instance. You also get mounting hardware for most current Intel and AMD mounts, instructions, thermal compound and a little spatula, an RGB controller box, RGB remote, and two RGB 120mm 4-pin PWM fans. The included fans feature 11 blades apiece and anti-vibration rubber pads on each mounting point, which should help cut down with vibrations and audible noise. With the cooler out the box, we get a much better look at the inline pump and the pretty unique CPU block. Raijintek do claim that the external pump does help prevent vibration passing through the motherboard or CPU, which I guess is true, but just as with the Antec cooler H2O K240 I tested previously, it does strike me as being a little bit gimmicky. With lots of current air and liquid coolers still passing vibration onto the CPU and motherboard, I guess if this has been an issue that could cause a fault, I would have thought this would have been addressed by more manufacturers and much sooner. The pump though is a pretty small package for being in line. It's attached a little bit closer to the radiator than the block and is only attached to just one of the tubing lines, so there is still a bit of movement which helps with tubing flexibility, allowing the tubing to slide through the looser side. The tubing itself is also Teflon mesh coated, which is great to see, and about 35cm long. With the inline pump installed, it's still pretty nice and flexible, so there shouldn't be any issues mounting the cooler to the top or front of your case. The pump is controlled by a standard 3-pin connection, and the cable is also braided, which is really nice. Taking a look at the CPU block, things start to get pretty interesting. The block is a little bit bulky, not ridiculous, but it's clear the flow meter takes up quite a bit of space internally. Looking through the little porthole window, we get a clearer view of the flow indicator. Off the bat, I will say I think this is a great addition and a bit of a masterstroke from Raijintek. Those who have previously installed sealed liquid coolers and have had their pump fail will know initially that there's not really any concrete way of telling that something's gone wrong. You might boot up your system and the temperatures will start to climb, and unless you're monitoring them constantly, you might just suddenly experience a shutdown. Sometimes the pump will give off a buzzing sound during operation, but this can be hard to notice with fans and other things spinning up. I'm sure anybody who's worked in tech support will admit that until you have the failed cooler in your hands, you're kind of guessing that the cooler is the issue. But to have a visual indicator on the block to show easily that the coolant is still flowing with a glance is pretty brilliant. On one side for the block there is also a small silver plug which brings us back to the included coolant. Unlike most AIO coolers on the market, which are sealed and maintenance free, the ORCUS 240 has been designed to be maintainable. The silver plug can be removed to allow you to top up the coolant as and when required. To me though, this is a bit of a mixed bag. For most, I'm sure one of the core benefits of a sealed AIO cooler over say a custom loop is firstly cost, and secondly lack of required maintenance and the secure knowledge that it's very unlikely to leak. The plug does add another potential point of failure, but after having a play with the cooler and checking through the little CPU block window, I couldn't see any air bubbles, so out the box you should be good to go. This does suggest that you wouldn't need to touch the plug or the coolant for quite some time. However, when consulting the instructions, there isn't much information on these requirements, just a couple of small diagrams to show the refilling progress. There are further videos and instructions on the Raijintek ORCUS 240 product page, but I can see this confusing a first-time builder who might think that filling the cooler is required off the bat, potentially damaging the cooler in the process. A little warning sticker on the plug or coolant could probably help prevent this. The Raijintek ORCUS 240 does require a bit more prior research because of this, and may be better suited to a user who's a bit more versed in liquid cooling and maintenance. The block, just like the fans, features RGB LED lighting, so there is still a small 4-pin controller cable running from the block. This does mean that there is a little bit of cable management from the block and the pump, so the external mounting of the pump doesn't help hugely with this cable management. The 4-pin RGB cables, however, have been designed to run to the included RGB controller, which features connections for up to 8 RGB fans or RGB devices. It's nice to see that there's some expansion and some flexibility in that regard. The controller itself is also well thought through. On the side there is a small switch which can be flipped between the motherboard RGB header setting and the included remote setting. This means that you can either set up both the CPU block's RGB LED and included RGB fans to run through software, or if, like our test bench, your motherboard doesn't support an internal RGB header, you can simply flip the switch and use the included remote. After recently helping a friend with a build, desperately trying to find a location, like an accessible one for the small RGB controller, the inclusion of a remote makes tons of sense, and changing lighting and modes way easier. My only small criticism of the controller box is that it's powered using a 4-pin Molex connection, which in 2018 is a little bit dated, a little bit disappointing. It would have been really nice to see a SATA power connection here. So far, the Raijintek ORCUS 240 looks pretty good. I'm a big fan of the flow meter mounted in the pump, and the RGB lighting has been well thought out in order to offer wide compatibility and convenience with the included remote. The inline pump is a little bit strange, and to me more of a necessity to free up space in the block for the coolant flow indicator, rather than offering a tangible benefit in reducing vibration on your CPU. But it'll be interesting to see how it performs, so let's take a look at installation. As with most AIO liquid coolers, we start with the backplate, which is heavily padded with foam to prevent direct contact with the back of your motherboard. You start by placing 4 long screws through each of the corners of the backplate, and then installing on the rear of your motherboard. With the backplate in place, you can lock it down with the 4 included thumb nut spacers. Washers are included that sit between your motherboard and the standoffs. With all 4 firmly in place, you can mount the top bracket with a further 4 small screws. And when in place, you can apply your thermal compound and mount the CPU block. Make sure, of course, to remove the CPU block warning label before screwing it in place. Both short and long radiator screws are included, depending on your preference of mounting for a push or pull configuration, and although the mounting hardware is not super clearly labelled, the radiator screws are packaged separately, which does help prevent confusion. Both short and long radiator mounting screws are included depending on your preference of push or pull mounting, and although the mounting hardware is not super clearly labelled, the radiator screws are packaged separately, which does help prevent confusion. The fan connections are split on each fan, so for each fan you get a 4-pin PWM connection and a 4-pin RGB LED connection. The cables for the fan for the 4-pin PWM connections are nice and long, but unfortunately a splitter isn't included, which does mean that you'll have to source one yourself or connect each fan to a separate motherboard 4-pin PWM header. The LED connections from each fan and the block can be run to the controller and then connected to your PSU via the 4-pin Molex cable. Overall, the process only took about 10 minutes once I'd fully versed myself with the instruction manual. I will say I think the instructions and mounting hardware could have been labelled a little bit better, but it didn't really hinder the installation that much. With the cooler installed, it's on to testing. At KitGuru, we have recently updated our testing setup and now test temperatures on the more recent Z170 platform. For CPU, we are testing with a Intel Core i7-7700K installed an Asus Z170 Pro gaming motherboard. For RAM, we have a single stick of Guile Evo X RGB for some added bling running at 3200 MHz. Storage is being handled by a 120 gig SanDisk SSD Plus. Powering our bench is of course a Seasonic Prime Platinum 650 watt PSU. When testing, we take a number of readings with both the i7 7700K's turbo locked and overclocked to 4.5 GHz. The temperatures taken are delta T values, meaning we subtract the ambient temperature from the CPU temperature. More details of our full testing methodology can be found on kitguru.net. Now, looking across the testing results, I was actually genuinely impressed. First at stock, the ORCUS 240 outpaced almost everything coming in third, just behind the Arctic Liquid Freezer 240 and the CryoRig A80, and only by a degree or so. At both load and idle temps are really impressive, and this carries through to our 4.5 GHz overclock. At 4.5, the ORCUS 240 doesn't budge, sitting in that third place position, and again only with a degree or so of difference. These are great temps to see, and a look back on previously tested coolers, there are a few small markers that help establish why these temperatures are so good. By comparison, say, to the Arctic Liquid Freezer, although you are sacrificing 2 additional fans, normally push-pull configurations on slimmer radiators only contribute to about a degree or 2 of difference. Not really groundbreaking. The ORCUS 240, however, does benefit from a max fan speed of 1800 RPM versus the Arctic Liquid Freezer's 1350 RPM. This does match up to our noise testing though, as the ORCUS 240 is a little louder at 45.7 dBA, which is where on paper it falls a little bit shorter, but again, only by a few decibels when compared to, say, the Dark Rock Pro 4. Overall, some pretty impressive results. Running the lighting through its paces, the included controller works really well. The LED within the CPU block really helps illuminate the flow indicator, and the ring fans look pretty spectacular. It works in a very similar fashion to some other remote-controlled RGB strips you may have come across, say, purchasing from Amazon. You have all the standard controls you can flick between, like white, red, green and blue as standard, with dedicated buttons on the remote. But to access more colours and effects, you have to move through the modes. As standalone colours, you can move through red, green, blue, yellow, purple and like an aqua and a white. You can have each of these colours breathing, and speed can be adjusted as well. There are also modes for breathing and cycling through colours, quick flashes through colours and smoother RGB transitions. As mentioned previously, there is an ORCUS 240 core version available, which does remove the fans for about £20 less, £10 or so a fan, which does make sense if you already have a case kitted out with fans, a trend I would really like to see adopted by more cooler and case manufacturers. So to summarise, there are a number of features that really impress me with the ORCUS 240. For starters, the flow indicator is great. I really can't fault this addition. My experience with sealed liquid coolers on the whole has been pretty positive, but really the only part to fail is the pump itself. The inclusion of this indicator makes it really easy to ensure everything is running smoothly without software, as well as making troubleshooting a breeze. As somebody who currently has a custom liquid cooled system, a flow indicator will definitely be my next addition, just for peace of mind. The external pump isn't really the be all and end all. As mentioned, I feel this is more of a necessity of the inclusion of the flow indicator, and unfortunately it does require a bit more cable management because it's external. But this isn't really a deal breaker for me. The RGB illumination looks great, and although there are not tons of options with the remote, the flexibility for connecting to both your motherboard for software control or for use with the remote is really pleasing to see. The performance in testing is really the standout for me. It's great to see a decrease in temperatures on both our stock and overclock setups, and the ORCUS 240 actually outpacing a number of coolers tested. Although sacrificing a little bit of audible noise, there would of course be some flexibility for tuning this through software to your preference. The package itself is really solid, the quality and feature set is great, but there are a few small points that do detract. Personally, I'd really like to see a SATA power connection on the RGB controller to save on an additional cable with a modular power supply, and just generally because the flimsy 4-pin Molex connection feels a little bit dated. The lack of a 4-pin PWM splitter is also a missed opportunity in my eyes. The maintenance element I'm a little bit split on. I can see the benefits for those who have experienced air bubbles in coolers causing more noise, but even for me, this was a little bit confusing. Partially down to the large quantity of coolant provided, and secondly as topping the liquid up is a stage included in the instructions, suggesting you need to do this at the beginning. The results of our temperature testing showed me that adding coolant out the box isn't really required. It's definitely a self-sealed, ready-to-go cooler, but this is a little bit unclear. A simple slip of paper or a couple of stickers directing the end user back to the Raijintek website I feel would resolve this. These are minor gripes though, and overall the Orcus 240 is still impressive. I do just feel that there are a few minor details that could be improved to really make it a solid contender. But please, let us know what you think. Please leave a dislike or a like depending on your preference, and let us know in the comments, is this a cooler that you would consider for your current or a new build? Make sure to hit subscribe or even hit the bell icon for notifications when new Kit Guru videos are available. I've been Silas for Kit Guru, and I will see you in the next one.